This is the BBC.
Dear brothers and sisters, all are welcome here at the Confessions podcast, whether saint or sinner.
Hello and welcome. It's another Confessions podcast from your friends at the BBC, where sinful and slightly dodgy members of the public come forward and tell their tales of deceit, debauchery and deception, seeking forgiveness from you, the parish of Radio 2, and Bobby and Joe as well.
This week, our Confessions Hall includes Captain A's shocking stag story, too many broken parts, Olly's wagon wheel Whopper, he's quite heavy, he's my brother, and Deborah's tale, say you, say we. And of course, we'll uncover yet another confession from the crypts that you've got in touch to request.
Let's start this week's podcast with Max's fishy tale, Daddy was a cart robber.
Please be seated.
OK, well, it's 30 minutes to 6 o'clock, so gather round, and here comes another confession, last one of the week, before we tie them up very neatly in a bow and put them in a podcast, which you can download from the Radio 2 website or from your favourite podcast platform. And tonight's show, bless you, comes from Max. Thank you, Max, Father Simon, Joe and Bobby. I would like to confess to an event which occurred about 20 years ago when I was working as a police officer. See, I asked for more police officer ones, so we get
And we get them.
My patch was what you would now refer to as footballers' wives' country, the affluent Manchester commuter belt around Cheshire. Why are you looking like that?
I was like, well, Knutsford comes to mind.
Well, I have no other opinion other than Manchester commuter belt around Cheshire. That's as specific as Max is being. At the time, some of these homes were being targeted by a team of burglars who were believed to be commuting from the outskirts of Manchester to carry out their criminal activities. We were subsequently on the lookout for any vehicles which stood out from the usual high-end cars or 4x4s which were usually to be seen on these leafy roads. One cold and wet winter night, I was on patrol in an unmarked police car with my partner, Steve. We drove into a lakeside car park at the heart of our patch when we spotted in a hidden-away corner a battered old Ford Escort. Aha! The check revealed that there was no record of a current owner. The vehicle had a few markers on it suggesting that it had been in the vicinity of some older burglaries. The tax disc was also out of date. It looked very, very suspicious. It belonged to people who were no good. I was onto a result here, and I could almost feel my colleagues slapping me on the back for nabbing the perpetrators. All I had to do was catch them. We informed HQ that we were on OBS of the vehicle, that's observation of the vehicle, and we would wait for the suspects to return, no doubt laden with stolen booty. We'd say, "We arrest you, chummy, in the name of the law." As the hours passed, we were because that's what all coppers do, and that's how they speak. As the hours passed, we were eventually called away to attend other jobs, but knowing the car would be returning to Manchester through our area, I decided be a very wise idea to deflate 3 of the car's tyres, knowing that they wouldn't be going very far very quickly like that. This was smart police work. Jed Mercurio would be proud. Around 5 a.m. we received a radio message reporting that a battered Ford Escort with 3 flat tyres was driving back to Manchester. What a result this was. We soon caught up with a limping car containing 3 rough-looking burly men. We pulled them over, requesting the occupants all get out and have a chat with the law. Quick search of the car revealed no booty at all. No stolen goods, but instead fishing rods, tackle and bait. My gang of housebreakers were nothing more than fishermen, and to be honest, exasperated fishermen, given that they had 3 flat tyres. Realising our mistake, we feigned ignorance about the tyres, obviously, and offered assistance, agreeing with the men that it must have been due to an act of vandalism caused by errant local kids who had nothing better to do. I'm pretty sure at some point I muttered the phrase, "Kids today, eh? It wasn't like this in our day." And, to general agreement, obviously. Once we'd helped get their tyres changed, we did give some words of advice about the out-of-date tax disc. But being the good man that I am, I decided I wouldn't issue a ticket on this particular occasion. I also promised to keep our eyes peeled for the real culprits. We'd be looking out for bad uns for the rest of the week. So anyway, therefore, clearly forgiveness is needed from the driver and his passengers, whose night of fishing not only ended without a catch, but with 3 flat tyres caused by me. In my defence, I was doing my best, and if things had been different, this could have resulted in the conviction of a team of prolific criminals. Well, yes, it could have done, Max, except that they weren't, so it didn't. Max says, I've been retired for a number of years now. I hope you can forgive. Well, I'm sure I'm sure many people will be quite pleased that this standard of policing no longer operates around the UK. Anyway, Max is a person looking for forgiveness, and Joe is going to make her decision.
Get out of here, Max. Get out of here. You blamed the kids. You didn't fess up. You gave them a hard time by the outdated tax disc. And you had words of advice about the outdated tax disc all the time, knowing that actually you got it wrong, that you'd messed up and these poor fishing men had been blamed for something, or they'd had their tyres let down. So no, get out of here, Max. You are not forgiven.
Not forgiven. OK, tonight's confession is called Daddy Was a Carp Robber, which is worth repeating just because it's a very fine title. Yes, Bobby?
I wasn't going to forgive, but then... you've kind of redeemed yourself with the tax disc, haven't you? So
really?
I wasn't going to, and I thought that's a good thing to do. But then you went, OK, well, I'll give you some time to get your tax in order.
No, surely that's a double mistake. Not only should he not have done the tyres, but then he should have done them for the tax.
Well, he shouldn't have done the tyres, you're right. But then he went, oh, actually, it's one of those things, it's a secret penance, isn't it? OK, well, I'll give you some extra time, fisherman, for... Go and get your tax.
Because
he knew he'd done something wrong.
Well, the fishermen were wrong as well, you see.
I think he should have done them. I think he should have done them.
He just felt guilty.
No. He just went, actually, you know what? It's also, sometimes people just forget. So, benefit of the doubt. So, on this occasion, Max, because of your generosity, I'm going to forgive you.
The Confessions Podcast.
And tonight's confession comes from Captain A. Thank you, Captain A. Here's tonight's tale. Dear Father Simon and the Confessional Conglomerate, my tale revolves around 6 young men. Myself, Pete, Harry, Paul, Tom and Dick. Friends from primary school in the early 60s. As we grew into our early 20s, the gang began to succumb to the siren call of the fairer sex. Some of us fell into the arms of matrimony, but we stayed true to the gang, and stag nights would lead to much reminiscing, many hijinks, and the imbibing of copious amounts of happy juice. Eventually it became Pete's turn, and he graciously asked that I be his best man, a duty I was more than willing to fulfill. Unfortunately, geography and commitments dictated that Pete, who was a doctor, would have to have his stag a mere 2 days before his wedding. Instantly problematic. And so on the date in question, we all met up at Paul's house mid-afternoon for what we called a pre-stag warm-up. Then at 5:30 we all departed on the 200-yard stagger to the local hostelry so that the stag night proper could begin in earnest. It was here that all the doctors and nurses from Pete's work joined the celebration, and they were as full of stories as we were, with the exchange of tales resulting in much good-natured ribbing for about a couple of hours. You see, Father Simon, for all his positive traits, Pete had one failing: the ability to get roaringly drunk on a packet of wine gums. So it came as no surprise when, not much after 7 o'clock in the evening, an unconscious groom-to-be was found snoring away on a bench in the corner of the pub. And it was then that someone suggested a scheme. Taxis were summoned, and several of his workmates and I were duly transported up to the hospital. Although, remember, he's a doctor, although not the one where Pete worked, I should add. There, his right leg was put in plaster from ankle to the top of his thigh, and a still unconscious Pete, along with a pair of crutches, were then dumped unceremoniously in a taxi and returned home to his shocked parents. Mum and Dad were reassured with something along the lines of, "Nothing serious, don't worry, he'll be fine. Explain all tomorrow. Gone back to the pub. Bye." Before I indeed returned to the hostelry to finish the night. However, in the early hours of the next morning, I was awoken by a relentless hammering on the front door. Bleary-eyed and slightly under the weather, I answered only to be told by the person standing there that I had to go back to work now, if not sooner. A quick phone call to Paul's house and a semi-garbled explanation was followed by a rushed departure back to work, which, in case I hadn't mentioned it, was as a soldier in the Falkland Islands, and this is just before the Falklands conflict, hence the reason for my rapid departure. Now, unfortunately, in my hurry to get away, I totally forgot about Pete and his plaster, and totally neglected to ring his parents to explain what we'd done. Also, unfortunately, in the course of the stag night, the rest of the gang had all heard me state, long and loudly, that I would sort it all out and that they were to leave it all to me. So no one did anything. Paul, as suddenly appointed stand-in best man for the next day, was so flabbergasted and panic-stricken, he never thought to mention it to anyone either. And Pete was, of course, off work at the hospital until after the honeymoon. To make matters worse, one of Pete's workmates had the idea of putting a card in his trouser pocket, so that when Pete woke up, totally unable to remember a thing from the night before, All he knew was that he'd been dumped back at home by me and had a card in his pocket which said he should report to the hospital to get his plaster removed in 4 months' time.
No!
The wedding photographs, Father Simon, are a joy to behold. The bride looked especially radiant in a beautiful flowing white dress, but the groom, on crutches and up to the crotch in a plaster cast, does, it must be said, look a little sheepish. All accompanied by the other members of the gang and his workmates, none of whom had the nerve to tell him. The honeymoon was, by all accounts, not what the bride and groom had envisaged when they had planned their fortnight on the Greek islands. On their return home, Pete, like a trooper, had gone back to work, gamely hobbling around the hospital on his crutches and grimly struggling on doing all the things that doctors do because, you guessed it, by this time there was absolutely no chance on earth that anyone was going to tell him that there was nothing wrong with him underneath the plaster.
Oh, my gosh.
That duty, Father Simon, fell to me. Arriving back in England some months later, after the Falklands conflict, I immediately went to the house to apologise for reneging on my promise to be best man, and was slightly shocked to find Pete still in plaster. After I'd stopped laughing, I immediately told him. Let's just say what happened after that made me wish I was back in the Falklands. So, here we are, Father Simon, and I throw myself on your mercy and beg forgiveness. I accept that one of the best man's duties traditionally was to ensure that the groom got home from his stag safe, sound and in one piece, and in that respect I failed miserably. I also beg forgiveness from his wife. The actions of the night ruined both their wedding photos, their honeymoon, and indeed the first few months of their marriage. However, the photos are quite funny. So not all bad, says Captain A. And that's it. So,
Oh, no, I want to know. I need to know what happened next.
one little prank, and the wedding photographs, the wedding, the honeymoon, the whole lot gone. Anyway, thank you, Captain A. Let's see what Joe says here.
I mean, fantastic story, but completely impossible to forgive, because there must have been some way that somebody could have told him and got that cast off, and he could have not had his photographs in a cast and his honeymoon and everything's just ruined. So it's kind of scandalous, isn't it, Bobby?
Bobby's cross, I think.
Well, this is my scandalous face, I have to say. One thing I'm confused at, Pete was a doctor, so the man in plaster was also a doctor.
Yes.
He didn't think at any point to go, is my leg broken all the way? Was it my fib? Was it my tib? Was it, did he not ask any more questions? I don't want that man as my doctor, that's what I'm saying. So he's not forgiven either for not being inquiring enough. But no, Captain A and your team, you are definitely not forgiven.
The Confessions Podcast.
Now, that was Captain A's confession, Too Many Broken Parts, which, while provoking some outrage, did actually lead to even more shocking confessions on the people's verdict.
When I was about 14, I was 2 days into a new job as a paperboy, and I hated it so much that I got my mother to cobble together a fake plaster cast on my arm to get out of it.
See, other people are doing it.
Just because other people are doing it, though, doesn't actually make it right. I'm not entirely sure about that.
I think lots of people have got fairly similar stories of getting out of geography or maths tests.
But that's quite extreme. I can't imagine many people go to those kind of lengths.
I bet Bobby skived off school.
Who, me?
Yes.
Really? Me?
Yes.
Oh, look at that face. Look at that face.
No, I can't tell you what face.
That says yes. That means yes, doesn't it? You did.
I have never done anything wrong ever.
You did, didn't you? You skived off school.
Oh, we are not doing this on national radio.
Oh, I think we are. How many days did you skive off
3
for?
months.
3 months?
Anyway, moving on.
What? No, not moving on. Or moving on.
That's amazing.
This is national radio. We are not doing it.
Okay.
Anyway, we'll all just have to suppose. Still to come on this week's podcast, find out what word our producer has been desperate for us not to say in this confession.
Well, I suspect this has been rewritten so that I wouldn't say but anyway, the I think is what we're talking about. Producer's shaking his head. That's because I kept on saying wagon wheel. Anyway, while the producer's head is rolling, let's take our weekly trip over to the parish notice board, find out what you, the parish, have been gossiping about. And Bobby, what have you got there?
Well, we've got another one of our occasional mini confessions from a younger listener, and her name is Faye. Faye says, "Hi, my older brother Lewis once gave me a 1p coin, saying it was a chocolate coin, which I then ate. But it got stuck in my windpipe and I was rushed to hospital to have an emergency operation to get it removed. My mum still carries that 1p in her purse to this day, and we've forgiven Lewis. Hopefully you can too."
Blimey, that's asking quite a lot. isn't it?
Thing is, he was young and he didn't really realise. He thought it was funny. It's a chocolate coin. You don't really realise the implications, maybe.
And we don't know the ages here. Could have been like 15. My older brother Lewis once gave me a 1p coin.
Oh, you
never know.
Right. OK, not forgiven.
Anyway, it's very much one for the don't try this at home,
Yes.
I would have thought. Interestingly, our producer did something similar. Apparently, except it was a chicken bone he had to have removed at the hospital, and he still keeps it in a glass jar at home. Which, when you think about it, is really weird.
But not surprising with the producer and everything.
Joe, what have you got on the notice board there?
I have an email from Keris McGrowerty, who is 13. And Keris says, I was listening to a Confessions podcast when I went for a walk today, and I didn't want to go home before I finished. So I took a detour and ended up laughing my head off at the John Lennon confession. I'd like to thank you all for keeping me amused for hours and hours.
And if you missed that, you can catch it on previous podcast. Anyway, very happy to know we keep you amused, Keris. I would urge you, of course, to pod carefully. It may be best to avoid busy streets and roads when listening to the Confessions podcast, lest the hilarity that we invoke may lead to accidents. Just a warning.
And speaking of unfortunate events, it's time now for our ever-popular X-rated confessions, stories that our producer, him again, didn't allow to make to the radio.
It's all about him, isn't it?
Isn't it always?
Yeah, that's true.
One such confession came from Tim, who thought that on the way home from his Viking Age reenactment group, he'd pop into the local shop in full costume. You must have known you'd give the older lady behind the till a complete fright. Not because you were a Viking, but because you were dressed as a monk and you were trying to pay for top-shelf magazines. Immoral on all counts, Brother Tim, and not fit for broadcast.
Yeah, no, I can see why that didn't get through. You know what, monks buying...
Classic car magazines.
That's what it was.
Yeah, definitely.
Obviously.
Trucks are us.
Also, that's one way of looking at it. Also not fit for tea time radio is Helen the air hostess's confession, in which she offends a passenger by asking when her baby's due and she wasn't pregnant. Well, why didn't that make the cut, you might be asking? Helen knew full well the only reason the woman was on the plane was because she was flying home and going straight to the hospital where her parents were there after a car accident. As if the poor woman wasn't upset enough already. So Helen, the air hostess, we don't approve, we don't laugh, and so you get into this part of the pod.
But our worst confession comes from Paul, who told us with glee the hilarious scrapes he used to get into looking after his younger brother, including leaving him behind in a shop for an hour and also letting his pushchair run free down a hill before running along to catch up with it. You're lucky, particularly Paul, that the one time you didn't catch it, your brother wasn't badly injured on the road. You are a bad, bad man.
That's another don't try that at home kind of idea. Anyway, confessions at bbc.co.uk, your tales of subscribing loved ones, pod listing mishaps, any general confessions, podcast-related stories you want to share with us.
And that brings our parish notice board section to a close for this week. So let's head back to the confessions that did make the cut. Here is Deborah's confession, Say You, Say We.
The Confessions Podcast.
And here comes Wednesday's confession, so gather round. And the last one will be tomorrow, and then it's all in the podcast, which you can get from the Radio 2 website or wherever you fancy going for your podcast. This is from Deborah. Thank you, Deborah. Father Simon and the celestial conjurers of moral comfort and key holders of the clear conscience. That's
Wow.
Good effort. I've carried my husband Andy's sleepwalking misdemeanours around with me like an albatross around my neck for a number of years. The weight has become too much to bear alone. And now that he is a retired detective inspector, the time has come to release myself of some of the burden and try to ensure that at least one of us makes it to heaven one day. It's not that much at stake, Deborah, I don't think, but anyway. On the night in question, she's writing like a copper. On the night in question, we'd been out at the annual Police, Sports and Social Club outing to London. And after a very enjoyable evening, we made it back to our hotel around midnight, suitably refreshed. Our room was on the 4th floor of a huge hotel, where all the rooms were built around a central open area that went from the ground to the top of the hotel. Natural light poured through, this is relevant, natural light poured through and gave every room the impression that they faced outside, when actually they were internal facing rooms. Nothing special about the room, a double window that looked out onto the open central space in the middle of the hotel. Door into the room, door into the bathroom, very straightforward. All my husband Andy needed to do was to take 2 steps from his side of the bed and he'd be at the bathroom. I could rest knowing that nighttime piddles would be done where they should be. He's a sleepwalker, you see.
OK.
in the toilet in the bathroom. Just to make sure nothing could go wrong, I turned the deadlock on the bedroom door and put the chain across. I did this thinking that if Andy did take a right turn towards the room door instead of a left turn towards the bathroom, he wouldn't be able to open the room door. I also knew that any fiddling with the lock and chain would definitely wake me up and I could jump out of bed, turn my husband right around and push him towards the bathroom door. As an extra measure, I left the bathroom light on. In effect, I'd made the room Andy-proof. What do you think? I don't think so. I'm not sure how long I'd been asleep when I was awoken by a very loud knocking at the room door. I reached out to give the sleeping Andy a nudge as he was nearer the door than me, but he wasn't there. He wasn't in bed. Clearly, he'd taken himself off to the bathroom. I was very proud he'd made it. What a good boy. "Someone at the door, Andy," I shouted. "Oh, there's someone at the door, Andy," I shouted, not wanting to leave the comfort of the warm bed. "I know," he replied, before adding, "Open the door and stop being stupid," in a rather agitated, almost panic-stricken voice, because it was him that was doing the knocking. I dragged myself to the door and looked through the magnifying spy hole, assuming no one would be there and that someone had just got the wrong room. However, I wasn't prepared for the sight that met my eyes, and as I stared through the spy hole, I had to step back in horror. I checked the door security was all in place, the chain still across and intact, the door deadlock still turned clockwise, therefore locked. I turned towards the bathroom door, opened it slowly. Andy wasn't in the bathroom. I turned to the bed. He wasn't in the bed. Just as my half-asleep brain was trying to work everything out, I heard Andy shout, "Deb, for heaven's sake, open the door!" I don't know why I didn't believe what my eyes saw through the spyglass, but I unlocked the deadlock and left the chain on before I opened the door to see, in all his 6'2" naked glory, my husband Andy. "Let me in, I'm frozen." Well, of course, I let him in, and after being told off for locking him out of the room, we went back to bed. But I couldn't work it out. I'd locked the door, I'd chained the door, yet Andy was on the other side. Turns out that what happened was Andy, sleepwalking, did get up to use the bathroom, not only bypassed the room door, but also bypassed the bathroom door. He walked around the bed and out through the patio windows and onto the inside-outside mezzanine walkway of the 4th floor. You remember the open area in the entrance of the hotel that went ground floor to top floor. Fully naked, Andy then took himself all around the mezzanine of the 4th floor until he found a lift. Went in it, headed to the 1st floor. He left the lift, finally located the toilet, although we probably better know it as a yucca plant.
Oh, no.
After doing his business, Andy was off again. Back to the lift, down 1 floor to the ground floor, where he was joined in the lift by the early morning cleaning lady, just starting her day. "You all right?" "Yeah, I'm fine." Up they went to the 4th floor. Out got Andy, trundled back to, you guessed it, our room. Yes, Father Simon, I'm very, very proud of my husband's homing instinct and magnificent sense of direction. And how on earth he found his way back to our room, I will never know. The night porter was as baffled as me as he followed Andy on his CCTV system, recording his every move. From the patio window of our hotel room, round the mezzanine, into and out of the lift on various floors, finally back to his room through the door. He later explained to me as he handed me a videotape that he was wondering which camera the naked bloke was going to pop up on next. So clearly we need forgiveness from the poor early morning cleaning lady. I still find the sight of my husband naked a sight to behold, so goodness knows what she must have thought, encountering him in a lift with only his hands covering where they needed to cover. Apparently she was the ultimate professional, didn't make a fuss, and just accompanied Andy from the 1st floor to the 4th floor before reporting the incident to the night porter, then laughing her head off with him as they watched my husband's antics on the CCTV. It's a thing, you know, and if you have a sleepwalking partner, then you have to take measures to make everything fine. And Deborah thought that that's exactly what had happened and everything was okay, but she hadn't banked on him actually going out the other way. Young Joe.
I think you probably made that cleaning lady's life what a story to be able to tell over and over again. And I don't think she'd be scarred for life. I think she would have been absolutely just dining out and explaining exactly what had happened to Andy and then being in the lift. There's nothing to forgive here whatsoever. You're obviously revelling in Andy's sleepwalking misdemeanours. It's a very, very funny story.
Okay, it's looking all right for Deborah so far. What do you say, Bobby?
I'm mystified. How many naked male sleepwalkers are there? We've never had any ladies, have we, that have sleepwalked, that I can remember?
I don't think
What is
so.
it with you boys that, I don't mean you, I mean generally, that
yes.
that you need to be taken care of. What's going wrong? Because we have to obviously push furniture in front of the door. It's the only way it's going to work. And also, Deborah, you don't have to be forgiven. Obviously, you're trying to be responsible for your other half, and you can only do so much. Having said that, you didn't secure that other door. So, you're a little bit at fault. If you do one and not the other, there may be all doors next time, but really nothing to forgive. The cleaning lady, I hope she gave you a feather duster to cover your modesty.
Very good. I think you're right, because you do only hear stories of men peeing in yucca plant pots and fridges and ovens and things like that. You never hear of women doing
But in terms of sleepwalking, do women must sleepwalk as much as men, surely?
You would have thought so, but do they?
I remember saying last time that if you're a sleepwalker, surely you should confess when you go into a hotel so they know that maybe they can put something on your door or something, or they know how to find you.
The Confessions Podcast.
It's confession time, and this one comes from Olly. Thank you. Tonight's tale from Olly. Dear Padre and the Calamative Clerical Collective. I was one of... Now, this is one of those confessions, and how you react to this will be where you are in the pecking order of your family.
Okay.
It's one of those. And Olly says, I was one of 5 siblings, having 2 older brothers and a younger brother and sister. Now, with any large family, it's always recognised that the youngest is always the favourite and can get away with pretty much anything.
Yep.
And there you go. And this was no exception. With my younger brother, before our younger sister came along, he had the puppy dog blue eyes, butter wouldn't melt looks, all that kind of stuff. Get it all the time. The blame inevitably always falling upon me, although I admit, says Olly, a lot of it was me. Anyway, to set the scene, me and my 3 brothers all shared the same bedroom and 2 bunk beds. My 2 older brothers in one, and me and my nemesis in the other. Needless to say, his puppy dog eyes helped him get the lower bunk. As a family, with only my father working, treats were few and far between. So when Mum used to come home from shopping with treats, a chocolate bar or a sherbet dip, it would always get us excited. On one particular day, Mum came home with a pack of the legendary round chocolate biscuit. Yeah, you know, the one that looked like wheels from a particular vehicle?
Oh.
The Wagon wheel. I suspect this has been rewritten so that I wouldn't say wagon wheel. But anyway, the Wagon wheel, I think, is what we're talking about. Producer's shaking his head.
The ones in the golden wrapper. Used to buy them at the tuck shop every morning.
Huge.
Yeah, they were really huge.
Then they got smaller. Anyway, now at that time they only came in a pack of 4, which for 5 hungry children meant some of us wouldn't be getting a full one. And as my mum wasn't daft, they were placed on the top shelf above the oven for safekeeping away from little hands. That particular night, after seeing Mum stash the wagon wheels, I couldn't stop thinking about them. So after fake sleeping until Mum and Dad had gone to bed, I crept out to hatch my evil genius plan. I went down the stairs, avoiding the creaky steps, and into the kitchen, where I then climbed onto the work surface and used a long salad tong to retrieve the pack of wheel-shaped biscuits, because obviously I've gone past the amount of times I can say, placed at the back of the cupboard. I took my chance, and like a quiet mouse, slowly unwrapped the chocolatey goodness and devoured it in only 3 bites. Wow, that must have been 3 very large bites.
Big mouth.
The taste was amazing. So amazing, I craved another. And another. And another. And before I knew it, I'd eaten all of them and had a giveaway chocolatey marshmallowy ring around my lips. It dawned on me then how much trouble I would be in, so I knew I had to hide the evidence. Now, the house was locked, so I couldn't take them outside. I also knew that if I put the wrappers in the bin, we would all be suspects. So I decided to hide the wrappers and the crumbs that were left in a place that would make me look the least guilty. The following morning, Mum and Dad called everyone downstairs and were told by angry Mother to line up oldest to youngest. Dad, who was a man not to be messed with, then said that someone had eaten all the treats and he was going to find out who it was. But immediately excused my sister, she was too short to reach the high cupboard. It was down to the remaining 4 of us, and Dad promptly read us the riot act, scaring us into giving details of the punishment that we'd be receiving, or he was giving us the details of the punishment we'd all be receiving if the culprit didn't own up. While Dad was doing this, Mum had gone upstairs, and when she came back down, she pointed to the person she'd worked out to be the culprit. Dad shrugged, shook his head disappointedly, and then said that me and my 2 older brothers could go back upstairs to bed, leaving the person Mum figured out to be the guilty one, my younger brother, you know him with the doughy eyes, to face the music. As I walked away, I thought back to my evil ingenious plan, and how I had stuffed the 4 wagon wheel wrappers under my brother's pillow and emptied some crumbs around his bed. However, my thoughts were soon overshadowed by the crying of my younger brother, as he had a strip torn off him by very angry parents. So I asked forgiveness for my other siblings, missing out on the weekend treats because I'd eaten them, and for having to get my dad out of bed on a Saturday morning missing his coffee. However, I don't ask forgiveness from my younger brother, as he deserved it. It was fair game, as he was no longer the youngest, and I had to set out the brotherly chain of command, so he knew where he fitted in. In fact, in my eyes, it made us pretty even for everything that he'd gotten away with previously. So very unrepentant Ollie, who frankly, by the sound of it, doesn't care whether he's forgiven or not, because he actually doesn't want forgiveness from his younger brother. A lot of sibling rivalry going in here, but you would think Mum might be suspicious. Would anyone be so stupid as to eat the 4 biscuits and then put the wrappers under their own pillow and have crumbs there? I don't think they would. So I think Mum was a bit daft. Anyway.
Bit naive, yeah. I was just on the point of forgiving, because it is really difficult, and obviously the middle child always feels very neglected and sorry for themselves, and does all kind of manner of things just to get attention. But then he's so unrepentant at the end. Of course, he can't be forgiven.
Okay, very good. So Bobby, where do you fit? I can't remember where you fit in.
I am the youngest and the middle, depending on which way you look at it.
Okay.
Anyway, but the point is Ollie, I don't feel sorry for you at all. You sound like a right oik. And even though you blame your brother for being spoilt and getting away for everything, it seems like you do most things wrong. So what did you expect? You can't do things and not expect to get into trouble. So that's ridiculous. And you sound really mean. And also, you stole all the wagon wheels from everybody else as well. Not only did you get into trouble, but you stole everything as well. So Ollie, no. Go and buy them wagon wheels and repent.
The Confessions Podcast.
That was Ollie's wagon wheel Whopper. He's quite heavy. He's my brother. Which once again brought out your darker side on the people's verdict.
Johnny from Southport, forgiven, simply on the basis that my elder sister did far worse things to me. When I was 3, she told my parents that I'd drunk a bottle of medicine. This resulted in me being rushed to hospital for 4 medics to hold me down and pump my stomach. Guess what? No medicine.
Wow. I think that was a really horrible story. Imagine that. I mean, it's one thing to play a prank on a member of your family, a sibling, but to end up with one of them getting a stomach pump.
It was atrocious, absolutely atrocious. That's as bad as we get sometimes.
Do you think we're making people better or we're making them worse?
I think we're exposing people, aren't we?
Okay. Is that making it better?
I think it helps because, of course, some people have no judgment and to think that far ahead. So it might just make them think.
Well, that's almost it from this week's Batch of Confessions. If you want to send in your own shocking secret, cringy catastrophe or just bad behaviour, email us anytime, day or night. We're always there, confessions@bbc.co.uk. But if you think we're finished, you're sorely mistaken, because now it's time for our weekly troll through the archives to dig out a confession from the crypt.
And today's confession request comes from Felicity Brayshaw, who says, Dear Simon, Joe and Bobby, I would love to hear the hilarious wildlife confession from a few years ago. It's about a young man who had a part-time job as a zookeeper. In the confession, he was driving some animals to their new home, but ran into trouble when he stopped by a police officer. It made me laugh so much when I heard it, and I'd love to hear it again. Thank you. That's Felicity, a.k.a. Fab.
Well, Felicity, I'd like to build up the suspense over whether we found it or not, but as we're reading your letter out, you can probably guess that we have. Thanks to Rosie for digging deep into the archive for the story we called Zoo Are You? And this is the only confession I think we've actually split into 2. There's a part 1 and a part 2. Here it comes.
The Confessions Podcast.
Here comes Thursday's confession. The novice is in, and 2 reverends, and here we go with a very interesting story, I think, from Terry. Terry, thank you very much indeed for tonight's tale. Father Simon, I was a penniless, inexperienced lad, and as my gap year before university was earning some money working as a temporary keeper at a local zoo. In 2014, of course, this is a skilled profession that requires training and qualifications. But in those distant days, anyone who could handle a shovel would be offered the job.
Different days.
Very, very different days. You wait. So I spent almost a year working with bears, wolves and lions. Towards the end of my time, it got your interest? Towards the end of my time there, I had arranged a date with another gap year student keeper. We were going to see The Sting at the local cinema, which is a movie for younger listeners, and not a reference to the police in any way. But when I arrived at the zoo that morning, the head keeper pounced on me and said, "Here, you can drive. We've got some animals that need to be moved to Yorkshire. You're the only person available. Off you go." Now, like all zoos, this one transported animals in a plain van. There were no telltale logos on the vehicle that indicated what was inside. It's never a good idea to advertise the fact that exotic animals are being moved, as there are some very strange people around. With a little help, I loaded the van with 4 parrots, 8 flamingos, a giant tortoise called Andronicus, and a very lively 1-year-old leopard. Ooh. This cat was a personal friend, as I'd helped hand-rear him. He was as friendly and as docile as a leopard can be, which is to say that most of the time he behaved well, but could never be fully trusted. The birds were no trouble. They were popped into a safe travelling cage, and when a cloth was draped over them, they just went to sleep. I know some people like that. Andronicus spent most of his life sleeping, so he'd be no problem. But the big cat was different. Young leopards are a lot like kittens. They're restless, enjoy exploring. To keep him quiet during the trip, the zoo vet gave the leopard a very slight sedative. Not to knock him out, but to make him doze gently for the 3-hour journey. Now, you know what it's like when you're transporting leopards a long way in a van. I think we all do. There are endless traffic problems. Roadworks and diversions plagued the whole trip. 3 hours came and went. We passed the 4-hour mark and still there was another 30 miles to go. Suddenly, from behind, came a rhythmic scrape, scrape, scrape as the leopard investigated the back of the van. The sedative had worn off. The cat was awake. His travelling cage was made of strong wood with a wire mesh front. For obvious reasons, this was facing away from the other animals, and the cage was tucked away at the back of the van, right next to the doors. The leopard wasn't yet fully grown and could just about get a paw through the wire, and he wanted to get out, and he wanted to play. Soon the noise changed to a chalk-on blackboard screech as his 4 curved razor-sharp claws came out and started to rake the steel. Good name for a band, by the way. He'd been in there long enough and was getting bored. A fidgety leopard really needs to be treated very carefully, even a young one. I wasn't too worried, as my destination was only 10 miles away, and soon he'd have a new big compound to explore. I was more worried about my date and was in real danger of being late and missing it. The animal still had to be unloaded, and it was a long drive back. To make it in time, I needed to speed up a little, and for the first time in the whole trip, there was an open, uncluttered road. I may have been a touch over-enthusiastic with the accelerator pedal, because within minutes, a flashing blue light appeared behind me. I pulled in and the policeman wandered over to my door. He seemed world-weary and really fed up with life. He'd probably done this just a few too many times. "Don't you like our road signs then?" he asked. I had no idea what he meant. I thought he was stopping me for doing something wrong, not to discuss aesthetics. "You were doing 42 miles an hour, and that there," he points to a large red and black 30 sign, "says you can do no more than 30 miles an hour. "Oh yes, I'm sorry," I say. "Do you have your driving licence with you?" I didn't, it was at home. "Is this your van, sir?" "No." "I see. Can you please tell me what you've got inside?" 4 parrots, 8 flamingos, a giant tortoise and a leopard. By now, he'd had enough. "OK, you, out of the van and open the doors." Find out what happened next. Previously on Terry's Confession. We concluded for part 1 with the policeman, the Yorkshire policeman, saying, "So what have you got in your van?" And him saying, 4 parrots, 8 flamingos, a giant tortoise and a leopard. And the policeman says, "OK, you, out of the van," and open the door. As I climbed out, the policeman called on his radio, obviously asking some unseen person to check on the vehicle's registration. He arrived just at the moment when the doors were opening. Big cats are renowned for their reflexes. They possess a speed that is incomprehensible to a human. That's why they are so very good at hunting, and their reputation is fully justified. The right-hand door opened. The policeman stepped forward just as a gold and black foot flashed forward with all claws out. It missed the policeman by a hair's breadth. To give him his due, he remained upright. "What the blazes?" he said in a voice 3 octaves higher than it had been a couple of minutes before. "It's okay," I said. "He's not trying to hurt you. He's just being friendly." The cat really wasn't attacking. He'd just been inside for too long. Without another word, the policeman turned and picked up his radio. He had a long chat with someone. He returned, reading from his notebook. "Seems this van is registered to a zoo," he said with a stare that told me nothing. "Yes, that's right. I'm a zookeeper. We're moving some animals as part of a breeding program." "Is that tiger deadly?" he asked. Well, my luck had been pushed too far. I had no intention of correcting his identification abilities and sidestepped his zoological mistake. "No," I said, "he's daft as a brush. Would you like to say hello?" I scratched his neck just below the ear. This is the cat, not the policeman. And the cat pushed against my hand, as he always did with everyone. "Would you like a go?" I say to the policeman. "Is it safe?" he says. Well, don't put your whole hand in. Just scratching with your fingertips, I explained. The leopard dropped onto its knees and rolled with pleasure as the policeman rubbed his neck. The world-weary copper had disappeared, and in his place stood a big kid playing with an unusually large cat. I really couldn't help liking the man. Well, he said, we better make sure the tiger gets home safe. Would you like a police escort? Well, now this could save my entire evening. So with sirens blazing and full blue lights flashing, the 4 parrots, 8 flamingos, giant tortoise and a very lively 1-year-old leopard arrived at their new home in time to eat and settle down for the night. Luckily, there were no animals to collect. The van was going back empty, so the turnaround time would be fast. The animals were carefully unloaded and fed. My job was done. But I still had to get all the way back in time for the film, and there wasn't a minute to spare. For the second time that day, my right foot was perhaps a little heavy on the pedal, and again, unbelievably, in my rearview mirror again I saw the menacing blue light of a panda car. This time, no possible reprieve. I immediately recognised the same officer who now appears at my door. I thought it might be you again, he said. What have you got in the back this time? I was by now nearly 2 hours later than planned and could only just make it to my date if I rushed. Suddenly, a wonderful time-saving opportunity materialised right in front of me. Monkeys. 6 baby monkeys. They have to get back quickly so they can have some milk. Young monkeys have to be fed every 4 hours. And snakes. Spitting cobras. They're amazing things, you know. They don't even have to bite you. And when they're angry, they spit venom right in your eyes. They can hit a target 6 feet away. Full dose will make you blind. It's very painful. That should do the trick, I thought. The kindly policeman took a step backwards. Yes, well, what time do the monkeys need their tea? He said. 8 o'clock at the latest. This traffic is terrible. I should be off, I'm saying. Tell you what, I'll give you a hand, says the policeman. Only to the motorway, mind, but we've got to make sure those monkeys and snakes are okay. Well, the motorway was nearly 20 miles away, and a police escort over that distance would solve all my problems. Jump in and follow me, says the monkey-loving policeman. He turns on his siren and flashing lights and goes herring off well over the speed limit. Traffic ahead of us parted as they saw an urgent high-speed emergency, giving escort an undisputed right-of-way to a completely empty van. I didn't know much about the police force, but even I could see that if his colleagues at the station discovered that this man had given a full siren escort to a troop of imaginary monkeys and snakes, his life wouldn't be worth living. But we made the 18-mile journey in a quarter of an hour. This was many years ago, Father Simon, and today I'm a professional zoologist with many books to my name and quite a few TV programmes. Retrospectively, there are some things I should have done differently, so belatedly, I offer my apologies and ask for forgiveness. Not from the leopard, who had a very good meal that night, lived a long life and went on to father 18 cubs. Check out the detail in this. I don't even ask apologies and forgiveness from the policeman who probably became a local celebrity. I'd like to apologise to my girlfriend for being 20 minutes late to see The Sting. It's quite a complicated film and I never quite understood it, but it was not my fault. Honest. Says Terry, we're changing his name, clearly, but anyway, how about that? How about an extraordinary wildlife confession involving a leopard? Didn't think we'd get one of those. What do you think, Sister Rebecca?
That's a fantastic story, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a bit Life of Pi, maybe crossed with
exactly
Noah's Ark.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly right.
I thought that, he showed loads of imagination, Terry did, by quick thinking by making up that story about the monkeys. And, the policeman must have been delighted to be escorting him and helping out the monkeys, as he thought, and the snakes. So I think the fact that he was 20 minutes late for his girlfriend, she should be grateful to have him. He's a wonderful guy, so forgiven.
Novice Nigel.
Well, there you go. So really, we know it was David Attenborough, and fantastic. So and loving and caring Yorkshire Constabulary, fantastic. I was once helped by a policeman. I was going one way down a one-way street the wrong way, and basically I said to them, "I'm only going one way," and they laughed, and then they escorted me correctly there. So
what a showbiz anecdote that is.
I know. You won't believe who was driving the car, the police car. I can't remember either. But they were very, very kind in Cirencester. Thank you. Moving on.
Yeah. So do you forgive?
Oh, yes, definitely.
Yeah. Brother Matthew.
And it is Life of Pi, because we're having a pie, even better.
Oh, well done. I'm going to say, obviously, you made this policeman's day. You got to cuddle a leopard, and you can't say that every day. So, yes, definitely forgive. You took a gamble with the monkeys, but, paid off, didn't it? Right. Well done.
The Confessions Podcast.
That was your confession from the crypt this week, featuring Matt and Nigel and Sister Rebecca. And we split it into two just because, first of all, it was quite long. But also, it just seemed to merit that kind of suspenseful moment halfway through when you're not quite sure how the animals are going to respond.
So if you have a request for a vintage confession, send us as many details about it as you can, including when we first read it out. That would help a lot. To confessions@bbc.co.uk, and we'll do our very best to dig them out of the crypt.
Nearly time for us to say goodbye for another week, and regular listeners will know that each week we ask you to tweet us a special code phrase to prove you've listened all the way through to the bitter end, which is what this is. Thanks to Usual Irritant, Sarah Crossland, Neris, Ed, Ross, Taz, Keith, Dr. Cat, and everyone else who tweeted, bandana in my pagoda.
That was a good one.
I think so. This week's new code phrase is, you sound like a right oik. Spelled O-I-K.
And that's it for this week. If you have something to get off your chest, then do send it in to confessions@bbc.co.uk.
If you haven't already done so, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. And remember, you can hear our show every day, Monday to Friday, 5 p.m. on Radio 2. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
The Confessions Podcast. Go in peace.